and my name's Hope. I'll be hosting this afternoon's session. If this is your first time watching a Learn Lounge session, there has been plenty of other brilliant talks that you can catch up on demand on the website. We've had talks from the likes of Olympian Anna Hemmings. We've also had Monty Panesar, the ex-England cricketer. So there's lots of very exciting things that we have been doing and will be doing in the coming weeks. Just waiting for some more people to join. If throughout today's session you have got any questions, please use the Q&A section on Big Marker, and we will have a Q&A session at the end where these will be answered. But do send them in because our guests love to answer all of your questions. Still just waiting for a few more people to join. Like I said, if you haven't seen any of our previous sessions, you can catch up on demand on the Learn Lounge website. Just a few more minutes and then we'll get going. Previous talks that we've had include Anna Hemmings, the Olympian. We've also had Monty Panesar, the ex-England cricketer. And we also last week had Sophie Darlington, who is an award-winning wildlife filmmaker. Just a few more moments and then we'll start today's session. If you've just joined, as I previously mentioned, if you have any questions during today's talk, you can use the Q&A section on Big Marker to ask our guest any questions that you have. No matter what career path you're thinking of taking, there is definitely a talk for everyone. So if you have missed any of our previous talks, you can watch them on demand on the Learn Lounge website. And I think we are all good to go. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to a new week of Learn Lounge talks with me, Hope. Learn Lounge is the new initiative by Springpod, where we bring you influencers, entrepreneurs, and many more to tell you their inspirational career stories. These incredible speakers are telling you their top tricks, tips, and life lessons to help you forge your own path in life. So make sure you tune in. Over the past couple of weeks, we've had some amazing speakers, including some famous names like ex-England cricketer Monty Panesar, Olympian Anna Hemmings, and award-winning wildlife filmmaker Sophie Darlington, and so many others. If you missed any of those, you can catch that on demand on the Learn Lounge website. Just a few points before we get going this afternoon. The talk should last about 40 minutes. Please do ask questions to our guests. They love to answer them. Remember to tag us on social media using the hashtag LearnLounge. And finally, we will be raising money for the Children's Trust, so please do donate. Now, when you think Formula One, undoubtedly the first things that come to mind are super fast cars and the hotshot racers who drive them, and not without reason. But as with many other types of industries, this one too has a lot of different roles and people who work behind the scenes to make it all as glorious as it looks. Today, we're excited to introduce you to F1 engineer Joe Sturdy. Over the past decade, Joe has progressed from a school leaver to a Formula One achiever, working for multiple teams in a variety of roles. He has been involved in designing, testing, and now racing cars at the highest level of motorsport. Joe's current assignment is in the engineering team behind the Honda engine that powered Red Bull Racing to multiple World Championship race wins in 2019. It's fantastic to have him on Learn Lounge today to talk about his journey, as well as giving us some insights into the variety of career paths available in this industry. Welcome to Learn Lounge, Joe.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me. And thank you very much to Springpod for inviting me to be here. As you've heard, my name is Joe Sturdy, and I'm an engineer in Formula One. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what I do currently, a little bit about how I ended up in the Formula One pit lane, and I'll also run through a list of some other career paths that could lead you there too. It's not all about engineering, as you'll see a little bit later on. Formula One itself, I know that not all of you will be familiar with what it is, but it changes year to year, and currently we have 20 drivers, generally regarded as the best in the world, and they drive for 10 different teams, 6 of which are based in the UK, and some of the others have facilities here. So there are a big proportion of teams in the UK on our doorstep, and more jobs available in Formula One in the UK than you might think. We have around 20 races each year. Each of those are in a different country, and they make up 2 championships. There's the World Drivers' Championship and the Constructors' Championship. The Constructors' Championship is why you will often hear teams talking about team orders, which is when you have 2 drivers from the same team fighting on track and taking risks, and they're asked to slow down and hold formation through to the finish to protect those all-important constructors' points. Those are generally the points that the teams themselves are most worried about, whereas the drivers are obviously competing for the Drivers' Championship. A typical race weekend consists of 3 practice sessions, a qualifying session, and the race itself. And this year we did have 22 of those races planned, but unfortunately, as you can see on the slides, a lot of those have been cancelled so far due to the current coronavirus situation. But hopefully we'll be able to resume racing at the beginning of July in Austria, although the plans for how that might happen are not finalised yet. My job within Formula One is one of many different engineering roles. Some people specialize in design, in aerodynamics, electronics, manufacturing, the list goes on. But my specific role is a power unit systems engineer for Honda, who supply engines to Red Bull Racing. And that title probably doesn't mean much to most people, so I'll explain what that means. The power unit consists of an engine like you have in most road cars. But the cars themselves are hybrids, so they have devices that can harvest excess energy from the engine, store it in a battery, and then use it at different locations around the track to try and decrease lap time. And the systems engineer makes sure that all of that lot performs exactly as it was designed to perform. So we do systems checks when the car's in the garage and analyze all of the components and the processes that the engine undertakes, and then we can be confident that when it goes out on track that it's all going to work and won't cause the driver any problems during the race. While it is on track, we're sat in the garage in front of big monitors watching hundreds of squiggly lines pass across our screen, and that's our way of monitoring everything that's going on. When the driver screams over the radio that he's lost power, then unfortunately that's when my job gets a lot more difficult, and that's when I earn my dinner. Now, you've heard what I am up to at the moment, but I'm going to skip back a little bit to how it all started for me in motorsport. My interest was sparked pretty early on. My dad, in his spare time, often built race and rally cars and got me involved wherever possible. And in fact, one of my earliest memories is crying outside of the workshop because I wasn't allowed in while my dad was using his welder. But he made it up to me, liking that photo by letting me sit in the driver's seat of the cars when they weren't being used. But I do remember I did once think it'd be a good idea to take the handbrake off when one of the cars was on a hill and nearly crashed into the house in my dad's pride and joy, which didn't go down too well. When I was old enough to finally compete myself, I did so at the age of 16. and I was involved in rally co-driving. And if you don't know what that means, that is the person that sits next to a driver in a rally car and describes the corners in front of the car before the driver gets to them. And that is me and my friend Nick, somewhere in Wales, flying through the air in a car that probably your grandma and granddad would drive around in town in. But with the addition of a roll cage and fire extinguishers and harnesses, etc., we had ourselves a little racing machine, and we were quite successful in it, but unfortunately didn't have the budget to progress as far as we might have liked to. And there came a time when I wanted to take my interest a little bit further than doing it just for fun. So thankfully, I wasn't too bad academically, and I was doing my A-levels at the time while we were rallying, and I did subjects that you'd associate with engineering, maths and science-based ones. And I got a place at Oxford Brookes University to study motorsport engineering. I'd heard that the department was quite well connected to Formula One, and that's what I was aiming for at that time. And one of the things I chose to do halfway through my degree was a year in industry, which I cannot recommend enough, because when I finished uni, I felt like I really had something to offer potential employers. That picture there is of me in my first week of a placement that was offered by Force India Formula One. That team is now called Racing Point and will soon be called Aston Martin, which is a bit confusing. But at this point, I'd seen the cars on TV, and I didn't really know anything about how they worked, but I was keen to learn. I'd never been to a Formula One race. It had been rallying that I was more involved in beforehand, but the placement itself involved the structural testing of parts from all areas of the Formula One car. So it was a really good opportunity to learn my way around the cars and speak to people in lots of different departments. And from that, I learned a huge amount, probably more than I had in my first few years at uni. And at the end of it, I was actually presented with Placement Student of the Year. But I was, however, the only placement student, but I was still happy with it. After finishing university, I took a similar job, but at a different team. It was still a UK-based job, but it was at the smallest team in Formula One at that time, Manor Racing. They were at the back of the grid, but 10th place to them felt like a win. So there was still a bit of a buzz and something to aim for each week. And again, I was testing components to see if they were suitable to be used on the racetrack. Being at a small team, it meant that I had quite a lot of responsibility for someone so junior, like more responsibility than I would have had at bigger teams for sure. And there were just two of us in the department, formerly known as Research and Development, but often rebranded as Research and Destruction, because we were regularly testing the limits of the parts that we were given by the design team. That included crash testing, which involved slamming the front end of the car into a solid wall. We had carbon fiber flying everywhere, made a big mess, but it added some excitement. And each week we were regularly snapping bits of carbon fiber that were worth more than I was earning in a year. Again, it was a really good role for learning my way around the car and learning the limits of what the F1 designers could produce. Towards the end of that role, I got involved in design myself. So yeah, it wasn't all just about breaking things. I really loved the job, but unfortunately it ended in redundancy because the team ran out of money and were no longer able to compete. I was still desperate for a trackside role within Formula One. I wanted to be thrown in at the deep end, but as is often the case, it's quite difficult to get someone to take the risk on you. But I got myself an interview for a trackside electronics role at Renault Formula One. It's something that I wasn't really qualified for at that point, but I read an electronics textbook the night before the interview and aced a technical test because of it. I ended up with a job, and after a bit of training, I proved myself and was made responsible for all of the electronic devices, the software and wiring on Nico Hulkenberg's car. And that's me on the right, notes in hand, preparing for my first race start in Australia. There were lots of distractions, crowds and TV cameras and celebrities wandering around. And I was desperately trying to remember all of my procedures for how to get the thing fired up and off the start line. It was an experience I don't think I'll ever forget, but I was well prepared enough and didn't have any major issues. It all became a little bit easier in the races after that. There came a point when the learning curve was starting to flatten off a little bit at Renault. I joined the team when it was finishing in the bottom half of the championship table. And just in a couple of years, we'd moved up, and that's me cheering Carlos Sainz across the line in Abu Dhabi to secure fourth place for the team in the championship, which was it's beyond where they should have been with the amount of money they'd spent on the project at that time, really. But as I said, the learning curve was flattening off a little bit, and I'd seen an opportunity to venture into something new. And at that point, I left Renault on good terms to go to Honda and into the world of power units. Once again, and there's a bit of a theme, I was a little bit underqualified for the role I'd been given, and I had to prove that I was a fast learner once again. Honda themselves had a shaky start to their latest F1 project. They'd been successful back in the day, but they'd had some not so great times with McLaren. But things took a turn for the better when they partnered with Red Bull in 2019. And I was fortunate enough to be part of the team that secured not only my first win, but Honda's first win since 2006. We also last year got Max Verstappen's first ever pole position. And in total, we had 3 wins, 2 poles, and a handful of other podiums. So a really successful year. We were hoping to jump straight into 2020 and fight for the championship, but obviously that's been put on hold for a little while. So that brings you up to the present day. I'm certainly not a veteran, but I've seen a little bit of the world, seen some things, and I also still remember what it's like to be starting out in the world of work. So what if engineering is not your thing? Well, there are plenty more options. There are hundreds of other roles within Formula One. So I thought I'd take you through a list of some of those and show you who else makes the races happen. You have, of course, the drivers, and that's me and Nico while I was at Renault. They don't often have the most conventional start to life. Generally, if you want to be a driver, you need to be an experienced race winner in a go-kart by the time you turn 10 years old, which is a big commitment from parents and one that requires a lot of family sacrifices. They spend many years and lots of money climbing through the categories in hope of making it to the top level. They're generally pretty clever people, athletic and very driven to extract the most performance they can out of themselves and the cars that they drive. Each driver has a trainer and a physio. So they will have a background in sport and exercise science, sports therapy maybe, and nutrition is obviously a huge part of it. And they spend pretty much all of the race weekend at the driver's side, making sure that they perform physically and mentally as well as they can. They can often be found putting together strange contraptions to simulate the forces that the drivers' bodies feel in the car, like Lando Norris there has got something strapped around his head, which is, I guess, designed to strengthen his neck for sort of the 4 or 5G that drivers' bodies can see during braking, cornering. A race of 300 kilometers certainly takes its toll on the body. The teams as a whole as well have someone in charge of general well-being. The pit stop crew, for example, need to be in shape as they're throwing wheels around all weekend long. And it's important for everyone, again, to perform at their best. So we have a team physio as well. Catering and hospitality. So as well as being fit, the teams need feeding and watering. And we have chefs that travel around the world with us, cooking close to 300 meals a day. There's 100 team members, all having 3 meals. It's a pretty big task. And there are lots of other hospitality staff to coordinate the busy schedule of events and make sure that guests and sponsors enjoy themselves. Generally, the healthier and better fed the team are, the better they perform. So it's a worthwhile investment. And in that picture is the Red Bull Energy Station, which, believe it or not, is a portable hospitality unit that we take around Europe with us. I think it does stretch the definition of portable, but it can be moved and does follow us around. And a lot of the people that eat in that are the guys I'm going to talk about in my next slide, which are the mechanics and technicians. They're a bit more hands-on than their engineering colleagues. They're also the people that build the cars, because the cars travel out to the races in thousands of pieces. I think it's a common misconception that we build the whole car at the beginning of the year and then it just sort of gets serviced as we go along. But basically, it all travels out to the races in suitcases. And we spend all of Wednesday and Thursday building it and testing it to make sure that it's all working properly before it goes on track. Some of the mechanics and technicians specialize in specific areas, maybe the hydraulics or the gearbox or the engine, while others are more general. We have a chief mechanic. Each car has a number 1 mechanic, number 2 mechanics, and so on. And while the engineers tend to do a lot of studying first and then slot into motorsport at F1 level, the mechanics follow a similar route to what the drivers do. They maybe start in club motorsport, move up to F3, F2, and then F1. There are lots of other championships below Formula One that they can sort of learn their trade in before making it to F1. They're also the people that change the wheels in the pit stops, which is another big part of their jobs. They have hundreds of practice sessions throughout the year. And Red Bull actually have the current world record for the fastest pit stop ever. That was done last year, and that's 1.82 seconds to change all 4 wheels, which I think is pretty impressive and certainly quicker than I could do it. A huge amount of F1 and teams revenue comes from TV rights. Last year we had an audience of nearly 500 million people. And here's a cameraman filming something on the pit wall, as they often do, maybe trying to get a reaction from the team principal. And the camera operators film for what is known as the world feed. And that is put together by F1 itself, and then broadcasters from all around the world speaking all different languages use that same footage to produce their own programs. In addition to the race footage, we also have things like the Netflix documentary Drive to Survive being filmed, which I recommend watching if you haven't seen. I do feature in it, but unfortunately didn't get a speaking part. The teams are often filming for social media and other online content. And each team also generally has photographers that they have contracts with that focus mainly on taking pictures of their cars, but also high resolution photos of the competitors for analysis back at the factory. There's a surprising amount of copying goes on in Formula One, and ideas don't stay unique for long. It's the job of F1 journalists like my friend Jack there to connect the outside world with what's going on inside the pit lane. There's lots of technical talk in F1, and that needs translating into something that the general public can understand. I think that F1 definitely becomes more interesting the more you know about it, and journalists play a big part in that. F1 is a big money sport. Huge amounts of cash change hands in return for worldwide exposure, and brands are eager to get involved and get their name on the ground around the world, but they need to see return on their investments. And a big part of race weekends is the hospitality for guests of the team and sponsor events, partnership announcements, campaign launches, etc. So lots of pit lane passes go to the people working in marketing, PR and communications. We basically couldn't run the cars without our computer network. It's too risky to run the cars blind. In particular, we need to be able to see data from the high voltage battery pack on the cars at all times. So we need experts in IT to make sure that everything stays up and running the whole time. And we also have links back across the world to our factories. And each team has a mission control type room, like in the picture, so that the factory-based engineers can monitor live data as it's happening at the track. So yeah, we'll be across in Brazil or something, and the guys in the UK can sit there and see exactly what's happening and chat to us via the radio communication network in the intercom about what's happening. So yeah, IT is really important. We have a number of different medical crews at the track, which is important when there are crashes. We have doctors present, but also the marshals, who are mostly volunteers. They get lots of training in the lead up to the race weekend on how to extract drivers from cars safely if the drivers are injured in an accident. The team also needs to be on form, and there's an organisation called Formula Medicine, who are a team of medical professionals on call at all times throughout the race weekend in case we have any issues whatsoever. There are not many replacements to hand for key members of staff who are ill at the other side of the world, so everyone needs looking after. Last on my list, but definitely not least, is everyone back at home while we're racing. So far, I just talked about some of the trackside staff that we have, but in reality, that's a tiny percentage of people who make it all happen. 90% of the team don't travel, and they're back at the factories for design, manufacturing, and the preparation of the cars for the race weekends. There are lots of departments with experts in hundreds of areas, all trying to make the car go quicker over the course of the year. The picture on the slide is of what I think is by far the most impressive F1 factory to look at, and that's the McLaren Technology Centre. So why would you want to work in F1 if you have a background that fits one of those roles? Well, the opportunity to travel the world is obviously one thing. It's a part of it that I really enjoy. You see lots of things that some people won't ever get the chance to. And I also feel that F1 appeals to people who like competition. The biggest thing for me is that you're not staying late at the office just because your boss has told you to. It's all essentially one big race, and the work you put in has a direct effect at the end of the day on how quick the car is. If nothing I've talked about so far interests you, I still think that anyone can learn something from what our sport does. For example, we put hundreds of sensors on the cars that don't necessarily make them any faster on their own. They often make it slower because of the weight, but they're there to make sure the engineers know just how fast or slow the car is at any time. On a sort of personal level, I think it's quite a good strategy to use. If you're very aware of just how good you are, you can take action. And I feel like people that succeed are not always the most competent, but they are the people that know exactly what their strengths and weaknesses are. So I think, yeah, it's always good to know just how good you are. Something else we do is document every single thing that goes wrong in a race weekend, however big or small. It could be that a bolt came loose, or it could be that the car came in for a pit stop and the new tyres weren't ready, which is what Mercedes did in Germany last year. It was all a little bit embarrassing for them. But each problem is generally assigned to someone between the races, and they have to make sure that that gets fixed before we race again. And it just makes the car and the whole operation ever more reliable. So learning from mistakes is what I'd take from that. And lastly, maybe something you can learn from what I've done in my fairly short career so far, and that's focus on being a fast learner, because I found that the deep end then doesn't stay deep for long. You might think that everything's gone quite smoothly for me so far in my career, bar the redundancy maybe, but I thought I'd put an end to that myth and share some examples of times when it didn't go quite so well. In the top left there is a picture of me co-driving for my dad. We went far too fast into that corner, or maybe I read out the corner too late. But thankfully it stayed on its wheels and we weren't stuck for too long. The bottom left, that's actually the last rally I did, probably the biggest and most expensive one I've done. And it was supposed to last 5 days, but unfortunately ended on day 3 when we rolled off the road. And the bottom right is actually my final race with Renault. And I showed you the picture of me cheering the other car across the finish line. But the reason I was able to be on the pit wall to cheer it on is because my driver Nico ended up upside down in the barriers on the first lap in Abu Dhabi. That was the final race of 2018. The reason I'm showing you those is I know that a lot of you have been planning for your exams recently and they've now been cancelled. It's obviously a completely different problem to the ones I've had, but I'm confident that with the help of organisations like Springpod, for example, the current situation will just be a bump in the road, and I'm sure you'll go on to do great things. A couple of final thoughts, final bit of advice. One of them is to not wait until you need a job to start having a look what's out there. If you have an experience like the ones I've had, you'll often see job advertisements with a list of requirements that don't mean anything to you at that point. It's better to see that early, and then you know what you don't know, essentially. All the teams have careers pages, and they list jobs on their websites, which are definitely worth looking at if Formula One is something that you think you might want to get involved in. The numbers of vacancies obviously fluctuate massively throughout the year, so don't be too disheartened if there's nothing available the first time you have a look. But feel free to get in touch with me via LinkedIn or Instagram, or however you see fit. I'll always try and make some time to reply. Thanks once again for listening.
Thank you so much, Joe. What a fantastic talk. And I had no idea there were so many different things you can do in Formula One. And that catering car is just extreme.
Yeah.
We're going to move on to the Q&A in a moment, but I have got my own question to ask you, first of all. You showed us a lot of different jobs within the industry. How easy is it to move between different jobs? Is that possible at all or not?
Yeah, I think it is. I think a big thing about Formula One is getting your foot in the door. For me, it was my placement that kind of set up everything going forwards. And I know of quite a few different people within Formula One who have started jobs in hospitality, for example, and then from that, you're in a really close-knit environment and a environment where it's easy to make new connections. And from that, you can branch out into other areas. The whole Formula One pit lane is, we call it a bit of a circus. It travels round together, and there's such a high concentration in the pit lane of people from different areas of the teams that, there are always people to talk to and relationships to be made that could help you branch out into other things in the future.
And you spoke about how you've got A-levels in science and maths, subjects like those. Is that necessary, or what qualifications are necessary to become an engineer in Formula One?
I think the most conventional route is to do sort of maths and science-based A-levels. But for example, the person I replaced at Renault, he didn't have a degree, and I'm pretty sure that he had not done the same A-levels that I had done. He took a route. I think he went into some kind of electronics manufacturing beforehand, learned the sort of the trade hands-on, and then later down the line he did part-time education. I think that if you're someone that can reach out to people who are at Formula One teams, and you can show them what you can do besides like showing them your A-level grades, I think that there's definitely still the possibility that you can get there without having to do the conventional route as I did.
So there are different routes into it.
Definitely.
Which kind of links into the next question we've had from one of our people who are watching. How difficult is it to become a Formula One engineer?
I think it's something you just have to work at over time. I would say that in terms of the difficulty at any one time, for me, it's not been super hard, but I did spend the first 6 years or something that I was working in Formula One desperately trying to get into the particular role that I wanted. I think it's maybe quite easy to get a role within Formula One, and then it's a long-term process to try and get the one that is perfect for you. So yeah, I think it's difficult to get exactly what you want, but I think by breaking it down into smaller steps and just moving towards your target, it becomes a bit easier.
And would you say that people should aim towards getting hands-on experience? Because you spoke about how you actually learnt more from getting stuck in rather than doing your degree.
Yeah, I did. I think the degree maybe proves to other people that that you know something, but on a personal level, I feel like I learnt more and have always learnt more by just getting stuck in and doing it myself. I think from being involved in motorsport as a hobby, that obviously helped. But I think getting work experience, even if it's voluntary, just for short periods of time, it just exposes you to things that you will never see in a classroom.
And it's perhaps something that can set you apart, which links nicely into another question I've got here. I've completed work experience at ProDrive, Ricardo and Mercedes HPP. I am aspiring on becoming a motorsport engineer. What can set me apart from everyone else? Currently, they're doing their A-levels.
To be honest, it sounds like this person has got quite a bit of experience. If they are at the stage where they're just doing their A-levels, that's certainly more than I had. And I've done a little bit of recruitment for when I was at Manor Racing. We hired a placement student, and that was the placement student's sort of first proper step into the world of work. They were paid to do that with us for the year. And when I was looking at all of the CVs that were coming through, having that kind of experience at the time that you're doing your A-levels would definitely stand out to me already. One thing that I would recommend, I did say about going onto teams' career pages. and having a look at the applications that can be made on there. But I feel like often using standard applications, you can just become another CV on the pile. So I think, again, reaching out to people and trying to build up a bit of a relationship with someone before you apply to a job with them can definitely make you stand out from the crowd.
Sometimes it's about who you know.
Yeah, I think it is sometimes. But obviously, you've got to go out there and make those connections.
About this question, how did you approach changing teams given how competitive they are? Because you have changed quite a lot of times.
I have, whether it's a good thing or not, I don't know. It seems to be working quite well so far. People take different approaches, don't they? Some people will spend 10 or 15 years in one role, and that's what they do in F1 often. But then others will sort of do shorter periods at teams, learning a lot, taking advantage of that steep learning curve, and then moving on, doing the same thing again. I've approached moving by just being honest to my colleagues and the people around me, really. Like, I left Manor, obviously it wasn't my choice. But when I left Renault, for example, I was just honest and said that it was career progression I was looking for. At that time within Renault, there wasn't anything that I could step straight into. It was going to be more of a longer term thing for me to move upwards. So I was just honest. And when people were saying, like, how come you're moving? They didn't really have anything that they could criticize me for, because they could definitely see the benefits to me making the move. I did occasionally have Nico shout at me across the pit lane that I was a traitor, though, unfortunately, which, a bit embarrassing when there are people around.
Hey, where you are now.
Yeah, exactly.
During this current coronavirus situation, have you still been working along Honda and Red Bull, possibly developing the engine further? What can you do from home?
We could do some things from home. We could do analysis and bits of engineering, like we have our laptops at home. But the FIA, Formula One's governing body, have actually asked the teams to take a period where everything shuts down. So I am currently on a shutdown, which means that we're not allowed to do any work associated with Formula One or any specific engineering work until the 17th of May, I think it ends. And some of the teams are shutting down for even longer. So we did take advantage of the time just after the Australia race, before everything went into shutdown, to try and push things forward. But unfortunately now we're not allowed to do anything. So I'm actually focusing more on home renovations at the moment.
It's a forced holiday. Yes,
it is indeed. But it is good to be able to catch up on things because we're away for such a big percentage of the year normally. And I imagine once we go racing again, we'll be away pretty much solidly for the second half of the year. So I guess it's all fair in the long run.
From the sounds of it, you're quite a close-knit team. Are you missing everyone?
Yeah, we are a close-knit team. We're missing everyone, but we're also, like most people at the moment, taking advantage of like online socializing. So there are lots of WhatsApp groups and Skype calls and video messaging going on. I do miss some of the guys, and half of the team, or half of the Honda team anyway, are based in Japan. So we are actually used to having a bit of a long distance relationship with them, if you like.
Wonderful. And lots of Zoom quizzes, I assume, as well.
Yeah, I've learned a lot of general knowledge and some facts that I probably won't use anywhere else. But yeah, there are some advantages to lockdown.
Better than me, I lose every quiz I do. We'll go to one more question, and then if anyone else has put a question on the question and answer section, All of those will be answered on the Springpod website. So we'll go for this one, nice one to end on. What advice would you give to young people looking to get into what you do? Obviously, you gave us a whole talk, but what would be the key bit of advice that you would say?
The key bit of advice, just focus on the things that you can change. Don't sort of look at Formula One and look at someone in the role that you one day sort of dream of being in, and don't focus on the fact that it's like so far away from you. Just focus on the little things you can change now, break it down into smaller pieces, and just try and constantly work towards your end goal. And I think by tuning into something like this, you're definitely doing that, and just keep taking advantage of things that people are putting out there to try and help you get into the roles and get where you want to be.
Set yourself little goals and get one at a time.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Joe. Thank you to all the questions that have come through. They've been brilliant, and some great answers and tricks and tips too. So to all of you watching, we're raising money in aid of the Children's Trust. You can see a link on your screen now if you would like to donate. Don't forget to tune in to our next session tomorrow, which is in the afternoon at 2:30, where we'll be talking to British inventor and Guinness World Record holder for the fastest jet suit, Richard Browning. So tune in then, and thanks for watching, and thanks again, Joe.
Thank you very much.
Bye.